trade war. We have, most countries have said they're not going to retaliate. We have an underlying emergency. The goal of this, of the trade deficit, where President Biden left us with a $1.2 trillion trade deficit, and the goal is to address that and the offshoring that led to that and the non-reciprocal treatment that led to that. That's the goal. Certainly there's a tariff revenue effect. If the countries do not do this, then they will be subject to the tariff. They'll have a tariff on foreign goods instead of American-made goods.
If the goal is to close trade deficits, then that would mean that the tariffs are a negotiating tool here. Is that right? Is that how you see it?
So the
or are you trying to use them to?
Well, it can go both ways, Senator. So on the first, we've talked a lot about negotiations because a lot of these countries, they have closed off markets to our exports in unfair ways. They've done it for decades, and nothing has persuaded them. Sitting down, talking nicely hasn't persuaded them.
But if you were trying to, so I'm all for fair trade, and I'm all for the idea that if somebody is not trading fairly with us, if they're not giving us fair markets, then we need to have a strategy to go after that. But yet this is a blanket approach. It's an across the board approach, which is going to contribute to raising costs, and that's why it just feels, I think, so chaotic to people.
Well, the trade deficit is a global issue. So you can't if you're trying to get the trade deficit, you can't just pick one or two countries and say, we're going to do this and become Swiss cheese. Like that. That would not be coherent. What's coherent has a global approach to what's a global issue, to take these countries, country by country, figure out how we can address our trade deficit with them and address trade market barriers with them. And that's the right approach. And that's what's happening. That's what the president's directed.
But I mean, as Senator Warner was pointing out, I guess it's a floor, you could call it, a 10% tariff, even with countries where we have a trade surplus. And by the way, this formula that the administration used to assign this so-called reciprocal tariff it just seems so arbitrary. I mean, where did that formula come from?
It's straightforward and it's common sense. It came from White House economists, and they proposed that looking at a country's trade deficit is a good approximation of the net effect of the unfairness, of the higher tariff rates, the higher trade barriers, the unfair trade practices, the dumping, the subsidies, all of that. And that's how you can capture that.
Well, so would you adapt that because it's based on trade surpluses, deficits can vary quite a bit from year to year. Would your plan be to change it if you get new yearly data? And then that would suggest, I guess, that the tariffs would be in place for a long time.
Well, we need to assess. Again, I think it becomes country by country. We have the baseline 10% to make sure there's no arbitraging of different jurisdictions. And all these countries that are subject to the highest rates, most of them have already come to talk to us about how to get it down. I mean, we have to take this step by step. We have to take it country by country to address these issues. The status quo just won't work anymore, and we can't do it piecemeal.
I'm not arguing for the status quo, Ambassador. I'm not arguing for the status quo, but I am questioning the rationality of this policy that is it's so chaotic, and it seems so arbitrary. It seems so internally inconsistent because, for example, if your goal is to onshore manufacturing, something that I think many of us on this side of the dais believe strongly that we need to be making things in this country again, but then that would suggest that these tariffs need to be in place for a very long time because what capital wants is consistency and stability and predictability. Yet at the same time, the administration seems to be arguing that we would be, waiving some of these tariffs if we could somehow magically negotiate, 50 new trade agreements with 50 different countries. I know my time is up here. I wanted to ask you a question about trade adjustment assistance, which I will follow up as a question for the record. But again, I think that my constituents are freaking out here.
seen volatility.
Have we seen one of the worst drops in the stock market in over 35 years?
I think, and Senator Warner talked about
We'll move
this.
on. If you don't want,
well, I know everyone's concerned about Wall Street, and I'm just concerned about Main Street and getting these jobs back.
Okay, let's talk about Main Street, Mr. Greer. Last time you were here, I asked if President Trump's trade war would hurt New Mexico businesses and families. You dodged my question. You told me, quote, I can't guarantee economic outcomes. When I pressed you, you told me that you want me to, quote, you asked me to, quote, hear from me on what the impacts of these tariffs are. Well, Mr. Greer, I'm here to tell you today New Mexicans are hurting. I understand why you would not guarantee that New Mexicans wouldn't be hurt, because you probably knew what I thought then that we now see today, that this is hurting people back home. Now, I want to ask you the same question again. Yes or no, will President Trump's tariffs harm New Mexican businesses and families?
Senator, I just don't think they will. Right now, you have duty-free trade with Canada and Mexico, where they comply with the rules, where they have U.S., Mexican, and American content. I mean, this is designed, and I would hope that being a border state, this is something that you find valuable, and that's what we're trying to do. We're trying to incentivize production in the United States. We want North America to be competitive, and this is. We can't have the status quo. We have to have a situation where we have manufacturing here, where we have foreign market access for our producers, and we want New Mexico families and companies and communities to prosper.
Mr. Greer, do you agree with President Trump that families are going to have to feel a little pain?
I'm not going to speak for the president.
I didn't ask for you to speak for him. I know none of you have the courage to stand up to him. What I'm asking you, Mr. Greer, is do you agree with what the president said about these tariffs, in that people are going to have to feel a little pain? That's my question.
If we have companies that feel pain because they're adjusting their supply chains, have more American product made by American workers, that's an adjustment we have to make to prepare for the future. We can't keep doing the same thing we always did. And if companies are having trouble adjusting their supply chains, which I'm very sensitive to, this is something that we have to deal with. We can't do nothing for 4 years like we saw under Biden, where there was just nothing going on trade.
Let me ask the question a little differently. Yes or no? Do you agree with President Trump when he said families are going to have to feel a little pain?
Of course, I agree with the president.
Thank you very much.
But I expect that the jobs we see for manufacturing is going to far outweigh anything. I'm short on time, sir.
So look, economists are predicting that Trump's trade war is going to cost American families about $4,000 per year. I disagree with your assessment now, and agreeing with Donald Trump that families should feel pain. When I asked you about the economic impact of families back home, you said, no, they're going to do great. Things are going to be wonderful. New Mexico should be appreciative of all these things. I guess pain is the kind of relief that you believe that families should be going through. I mean, it is what it is. As I've been saying to my colleagues here, I understand the outcome of this last election. Donald Trump is now the president of the United States. He won the election. My Republican colleagues in the Senate won the election. They control the votes in this chamber. They control the votes in the House. That's why we're seeing these budget resolutions. All I'm saying is own up to what you want to do. You want to do it. Just be honest with the American people about what's going on. I appreciate the time today, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
The same economists who are crying out now were the ones who said we were going to crash the economy, and Trump won. We put tariffs on China, and real median household income went up for Americans by $7,000. Inflation went down, unemployment went down. So we have history showing that we know how to use this.
Mr. Chairman, since Mr. Greer went on, I will just follow up again. Then help explain the pain that people are feeling today with your assessment of what Donald Trump said, that families should feel some pain. That's all okay with you all?
Senator, we're not going to be in a situation where we keep allowing Wall Street to run the economy. And as we're making that transition, companies
you know what, Mr. Greer,
will need to adjust.
Go spend a little time at the grocery store talking to some of my constituents back home. I'll take you around. We'll walk around. We're not going to give anyone a heads up. You just go do it. And let's see what the regular folks back home are doing, including the people that come and talk to me that say they voted for this president. This is not what they stand up for. Farmers and ranchers are getting the short end of the stick from USDA, where these grants are being cut, and they say, oh, no, it's because we don't want to give people food. Baloney. You're cutting the lifeline for these farmers and ranchers as well, in addition to what's happening with these inputs with tariffs. Look, you all are a lot smarter than I. I'm just a regular person back home. I'm one of them.
Senator Warnock.
That's the difference between you and I, sir.
Senator Warnock.
Thank you very much, Brother Chair. Since President Trump announced his tariffs last week, the stock market has dropped more than 10%. We've talked about that. I'm more concerned about the impact on ordinary people. This for me is a regressive tax. It's a tax on families who are already dealing with increasing costs and are trying to figure out how to make their lives work. I heard you say, Mr. Greer, that you don't think this is that we're in a trade war, and I respect your expertise on trade, but tomorrow the Trump administration will implement its reciprocal tariffs, which means businesses and families have had less than 1 week to plan for the largest tax increase in more than 50 years. So we are escalating, and so we can go back and forth about whether we think it's a trade war. I'm focused on how this is impacting families. Normally, when tariffs are being discussed, businesses and industries have time to plan. And the government often provides an orderly and clear process for American companies to apply for exclusions from tariffs when it's not possible for them to sell a product without importing parts or no one manufactures it here. We all know uncertainty is the worst thing for business. I'm hearing this from farmers. I'm hearing it from folks in the manufacturing sector. So I hope we can provide some certainty. What should a multinational retailer do about their products made only overseas or that contain parts only made overseas? We're seeing this in our automotive sector in Georgia. Should they just raise their prices on families to account for the new tax, or is there a process for that company to reach out to the White House for an exclusion?
So Senator Warnock, the Section 232 on autos is a Commerce Department action. One thing they've done is they have said that they would be willing to give some kind of a credit for U.S. content in parts and components, and they can approach the Commerce Department about this. It's not a decision I'm making, but I know that this is one alternative. I'm mindful, when I hear this, obviously we're sensitive to these dynamics, but it just reminds me that we lost 5 million manufacturing jobs over the last 20 years, and that's part of the reason why we're in this situation now, and we just have to bring those back. So it's important to bring them back now before the situation gets worse.
But the question is, what do they do? Do they pass that price on to consumers?
Well, what we've seen is Ford and GM, for example, have announced actually that they're giving discounts. That was the big news last Thursday. They'd be giving discounts going forward. These companies often are going to figure out how they allocate costs among themselves, and it rarely gets down to the consumer in one-for-one basis.
So the company might figure it out, I think, is a man.
Well, they can approach the Commerce Department to talk about the credits.
Let me go smaller. Last week, my office met with Angela Hawkins. She's the founder of Bamboo, a small business in Atlanta that sells bamboo-based sleepwear and sheets, particularly for people with severe and sensitive skin allergies like her husband. Angela's products are made overseas because you can't really find bamboo fabric made in the United States. What should Angela do? Pay the new tax, raise her prices, and risk losing customers? Or is there a process for her to apply for an exclusion from the Trump White House?
So, Senator, the president has said that in connection with this action, he's not going to have exclusions or exemptions beyond what's in the program already for certain products.
So she'll just have to figure it out.
She'll have to work with her business partners and find about sourcing, and
she'll have to either raise prices and risk customers. Basically, is the answer, right? Because she can't get bamboo here.
It will depend on the tariff rate. Every country has a different rate, and some are much lower than others, and so they're
she might even go out of business. Let's go even smaller. Early estimates show that President Trump's tariffs will increase the cost of goods by $3,800 for an average American household. Many critical baby goods like cribs and baby gates are produced abroad or made or have foreign-made components. I went through this not long ago as a parent of young children. For an expecting family in Augusta, Georgia, who may now see a 50% price increase for that stroller or car seat, what is the process for that family to apply for a White House exclusion? I guess if the business owner can't get one, they can't get one either, correct?
So there's not an exclusion process. That's right.
So they would just bear the cost.
Well, I think the studies you're talking about, the economists, they got it wrong in Trump 1. They said there was going to be inflation because of tariffs, and it went down. So when I hear them now saying the same thing, I just don't trust what they're saying. And that's, the fact of history shows that it's not a one-to-one. The highest inflation we ever saw was under Biden for housing and education and healthcare and all of these things. And it was, and I don't know where everybody was then when that was skyrocketing by 20%.
What if their child is potassium deficient and now bananas are more expensive? Last I checked, we don't have the climate to grow bananas in the United States. Who should that family reach out to the White House for an exclusion for that price hike on those bananas?
Well, again, as we've discussed, there's not an exclusion process. I think we've waited too long with the status quo. I know people want the status quo. They want the trading system that Wall Street likes, but we can't have it anymore.
So here you and I agree. Nobody wants the status quo. This economy is not working for working families, for ordinary people. And I would submit that what the president did last week in such a reckless and sudden way is adding even more pressure on these families. Thank you so much.
Senator Warren.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Donald Trump is single-handedly driving this economy off a cliff. With no evidence to back him up, he's claimed emergency authorities to slap new tariffs on nearly every product we import from nearly every country. But Congress has the power to reverse these tariffs, and we should do so immediately. Tariffs can be a tool to help build things in America, but Trump has slapped tariffs on, then off again with no rhyme or reason. And the uncertainty about the long-term rules makes companies far less likely to invest in manufacturing or jobs here in the United States. If Congress doesn't stand up to Trump, economists predict a recession before the end of the year. And Fed Chair Jerome Powell says we're in a real danger of, quote, both higher unemployment and higher inflation. Translation, Trump's tariffs will push millions of workers out of jobs and push prices up at the same time. So, Ambassador Greer, we've heard a lot of conflicting statements about whether these tariffs are here to stay, how many more rounds of on-off we're going to do. So let me ask the question from a different perspective. Ambassador Greer, we lost 700,000 jobs each month in the last recession. If 700,000 Americans lose their jobs, will the Trump administration suspend these tariffs?
Senator, I think the economists who are making these projections, who often are in favor of fully unfettered free trade, are the same ones who said in the first Trump term that putting tariffs
Greer, Ambassador Greer, let me just
Senator.
stop you there. I'm not asking about projections. I'm asking if the numbers show that 700,000 people have lost their jobs because of these new tariffs that Trump has slapped on, will the administration reverse course and lift those tariffs?
Senator, that's not going to happen. We've lost 5 million manufacturing jobs over the years, which is the number I'm most worried about, and we have to get those jobs
back. So I take that as a no. Let me try another one. Moody's says that if the Trump tariffs remain in place, we will definitely plunge into a recession, which will ultimately cost 3.5 million Americans their jobs. So, Ambassador Greer, if Trump's tariffs push 3.5 million people out of work, will the Trump administration reverse course and lift those tariffs?
Senator, the Wall Street analysts are wrong. They never want to have any kind of change to the status quo.
Right or wrong.
But that's who you're quoting to me,
Senator.
Senator.
I'm giving you a number. If the number is 3.5 million, if it never comes to pass, you don't have to worry about your answer. But if 3.5 million people lose their jobs because of these tariffs, is the Trump administration prepared to lift them?
Right now, this minute, we're working on negotiations with countries who believe they can achieve reciprocity with us and get their trade deficit down. And that's the emergency we're focused on. There's not going to be a situation where years from now we've lost millions of jobs.
Let me try one more time. If Trump tariffs push workers out of their jobs and raise prices, as Fed Chair Powell has predicted, will you reverse course then?
I think also with respect to Chairman Powell, who I don't know personally, but I know the president makes decisions on trade, and he rarely takes advice from Chairman Powell on this. We found in Trump 1 that you could put tariffs on China and you could make it work and have lower income, lower unemployment, lower in inflation, and increase real median household income over time as we reshore. And that's what we have to do, Senator.
What I'm hearing you say is that no one can hear a rhyme or reason to why the tariffs are off again, on again, off again, on again. But what you're telling us is the fact that hundreds of thousands, even millions of people could lose their jobs and that prices could go up will not be a factor for you or for Donald Trump for rolling those tariffs back. Look, if Republicans are serious about protecting American jobs and fighting inflation, then they can join Democrats right now to pass a resolution to fix Trump's reckless tariffs. This economy is teetering on the edge of collapse. We have the power right here in the Senate and over in the House of Representatives to take this authority away from Donald Trump. We can get this voted on. Senator Wyden and I have already are about to introduce the bill to do that. And if Republicans are serious about not playing the red light, green light with tariffs, but instead about protecting our economy, our families, our jobs, and keeping prices low, then Republicans should join us on that. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Senator Welch.
Thank you. You know, there's a place for tariffs on China. Targeted tariffs make some sense. What is being rolled out and the way this is being done is so destructive and so reckless and so irresponsible that it's creating nothing but economic chaos, uncertainty, and suffering for a lot of people. These are really disastrous for Vermont. I just want to go through this question of how do these roll out? You did not set, as our trade representative, the tariff rates on all of these countries that were on display when the president announced them, right?
Senator, the president made a decision on how he wanted to have the tariff set, and the economic cabinet advised him on that.
Right, but you did not set like the 50% rate on Lesotho.
I personally didn't, no.
Yeah, can you explain how that makes any sense?
So the way that the methodology works is the emergency we're talking about is premised on the trade deficit, which we think is well, I'm trying to explain the methodology, Senator, if you want to hear it.
This has got to get concrete because this has real impacts on everyday people. So the rhetoric about what the goals are when the rollout is so in conflict with achieving anything other than economic downturn. How did the 50% rate on Lesotho be decided?
So when you have White House economists who assess the trade deficit.
But you had no role in it?
Well, I certainly had a role in it. Everyone was advising the president on how to do this.
Tell me why I came up with 50% for Lesotho.
Well, I'd like to tell you, Senator. So when you look at a country's trade deficit, we believe that captures some of the unfairnesses, and you have to have a uniform methodology. You can't be arbitrary or capricious.
I'm going to keep going because Lesotho does diamonds, and
I'm happy to talk more to you about the methodology.
There is, I mean, my sense is there is no methodology. I asked ChatGPT, and basically they came up with some formula.
Well, that's not true.
Well, here's how it looks. Donald Trump just got fed up and said, what the heck, we'll just go with this formula that makes no sense. Number two, the issue of these tariffs. Now, the phone is ringing off the hook at the White House from countries wanting to get a break, right?
They want to talk about how to have reciprocal trade with us and how to get that deficit down.
That's right. So here's the structural issue that is really alarming to me, and I hope to all of us. We are using these tariffs, or the president is using these tariffs, from going from an economy that's based on competition to one that's based on access. You know, in a competitive economy, your product, your service determines the outcome and how well you do. In an access economy, it's who's got Donald Trump's number, who's got your number, who's got Lutnick's number, and you call up and you get a break. That's an access economy. Is this going to be the arbitrary authority of the president to decide, yes, we'll cut the Vietnam tariff, and no, we'll sustain the tariff on Lesotho?
The way this works, Senator, is we have long-standing relationships with trade officials in these foreign countries, and they work with our staff, our career staff, and they develop, if someone comes to us with an offer, we review it, we analyze it, and we present it to the president.
They're calling the president. I mean, you've got Donald Trump as president basically picking and choosing winners and losers, and who knows on what basis. That's not a trade regime that anybody can count on. That's something they can game if they know you, they know Lutnick, they know Donald Trump. That I think was what Senator Warnock was asking about. We've got farmers on the border with Canada. They get their grain. It's going to be 25% hit. We've got consumers whose electricity bills are going up because of retaliation from Canada. Can they make a call to you, to Howard Lutnick, to the president, and ask for relief?
Well, we certainly talk to all kinds of constituents. We talk to labor unions, we talk to civil society, we talk to business. I would say with Canada and Mexico, they receive duty-free treatment for things that follow the rules of USMCA. If they bring in Chinese content and send it down, they won't get a break.
Let me tell you the frustration I have. There is a place for targeted tariffs to help us and also to push back on unfair trade practices. I support that. That's not what this is. This is utter chaos, arbitrary and willful on the part of the president that is setting up a dynamic where he picks winners and losers rather than companies compete to do the best they can and have the benefit of good work and a good product. Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Thank you. Senator Barrasso.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Well, appreciate you being here to answer questions. Look, I'm concerned for Wyoming and for workers across the country. I'm worried that foreign competitors continue to use unfair trade practices against the United States, against our workers, against our producers. These practices threaten our economic security, our prosperity. We want a safe and prosperous nation. Workers in my home state and across the country are paying the price. So can you just talk a little bit about how you determine if foreign trade and economic practices constitute an emergency for our country? And I just heard our previous speaker talk about asking ChatGPT. I'm not going to do that. I'm going to ask you, how is it that we determine if foreign trade and economic practices constitute an emergency for our country?
Thank you, Senator. In the first instance, when the president declares an emergency, he has to consider where there is, the conditions that may impact national and economic security. And so for him, he took a look at our trade deficit, which was the largest in human history under President Biden, 1.2 trillion. And we looked at what the effect of that was. And it includes loss of 5 million manufacturing jobs, loss of 90,000 factories, loss of competitiveness with China in advanced technology. And then we looked at what are some of the causes of the trade deficit. And certainly there's currency manipulation, there's other currency factors, but also non-reciprocity in trade, barriers overseas, whether tariffs or non-tariff barriers that keep us out, unfair trading practices like dumping and other things that push things into our market, or subsidies, or state-directed economies. And so those are the things we look at. And then when you move to the countries, obviously it's common sense to have a baseline to make sure there's no cheating and that we can get at the deficit broadly based, and then to have a higher rate for those who have who pose the biggest challenges in terms of the trade deficit and unfair practices.
Thanks. Can I ask you about nuclear fuel? And, for decades, America led the world in uranium production. Today, there's virtually no commercial enrichment capacity. We're dangerously dependent on imports from other countries. Congress took a strong stand by banning Russian uranium imports. We're now seeing a troubling shift with increased uranium imports coming from China. And we think it's the uranium from Russia going to China, which they then sell to the United States. So we've simply replaced one adversary with another. This poses to me a serious threat to our national security, to our energy independence. Wyoming has the resources and the workforce to revive American uranium production. But what we know is that subsidized foreign uranium from China and from Russia threatens to undermine our domestic industry. Well, you're going to support efforts to end uranium imports from China as we continue to try to build our U.S. nuclear supply.
Senator, I'm happy to talk to you about that and the best way to implement that kind of action.
Great. Market access for Wyoming beef. Our ranchers are seeing what you recently did, what the president has recently done, and say it's about time. I know you heard a lot about market access today. Just specifically discuss market access for American beef. It's our #1 cash crop in Wyoming. Our ranchers produce some of the highest quality beef in the world, yet our beef faces significant barriers in key foreign markets.
So I do appreciate your office's efforts to document the numerous barriers that unfairly block American beef exports. For example, Thailand imposes a 50% tariff on American beef. The European Union's numerous, quote, Green Deal restrictions limit market opportunities for our ranchers. Australia's barriers prevent the sale of a safe, high-quality American beef. They've sold $29 billion into our country. We can't sell a hamburger there. So Wyoming beef producers have felt the direct impact of these unfair trade practices, and I say it's our #1 cash crop. What steps do you see being taken now to open new markets and ensure fair access for our beef around the world where we've been blocked?
So, Senator, as everyone knows, we have a lot of countries coming to talk to us right now who want to have more reciprocal trade, get their trade deficit down. And obviously part of that is making sure we have access for products like beef, making sure we're exporting products like beef. I've talked to the Australians about this issue. It's always surprising because they're a great partner for us globally. This is a big issue with them. Southeast Asia as well. These are things that are on our list when people come to talk to us. It's something we've recorded for years, and we expect countries to change this.
Great. Thank you. In terms of critical minerals, we sit on vast deposits of critical minerals in Wyoming essential for our national security. Our state has significant reserves of rare earth elements. Are there some trade initiatives that you're taking right now that are going to pursue to counter China's dominance in the critical minerals world, both in terms of production as well as refinement?
Yes. Well, I know, for example, this is at the Commerce Department, but I know they're considering whether they need to take some kind of an action and looking into potential Section 232 investigation of critical minerals to know, how we can get that here, how we can get processing here in our near abroad, how to make sure we're not dependent on China for those things.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Senator Blackburn.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you for being here today. I know you have had a busy week, and we appreciate that and appreciate what the President is trying to do for the broader economy. And, of course, it is encouraging to hear that we have 70 countries that are coming in to negotiate tariffs and some of those non-tariff barriers that have existed. So we're grateful for all that work. I do want to ask you about some of the foreign governments using bogus environmental regulations to really sideline American businesses. And the EU's new deforestation regulation is a great example of this, imposing excessive reporting requirements that would shut out Tennessee pulp and paper producers from foreign markets. And also, we're seeing some of these foreign governments actually seize U.S. assets under false pretenses. And last year we had a company, Vulcan Materials, which declined to sell its Mexican port to the government. So armed forces came in and took control of that, citing environmental licensing requirements. And this is a pattern of regulatory abuse, and it keeps our companies out of the global market. So how are you working to protect these U.S. businesses and to deal with these foreign governments who are weaponizing their bogus regulations to restrict the market access?
Well, Senator, I always find it troubling when countries use these kind of measures as a protectionist measure. Our companies, whether they're making here and exporting or going elsewhere to produce in other countries, are always the cleanest and most responsible, always. And we should always have the best treatment under those kinds of regimes. So with respect to the two examples you noted on the Vulcan issue, I've raised this personally with Mexican trade officials. And with respect to the EU forestry regulation, my understanding is right now it's a little bit on pause while they themselves look at it and take a second look. And I talk to my counterparts in Europe frequently, and this is something where I want to make sure that they're treating us appropriately under this law, not discriminating against us.
That's wonderful. If I could get in writing from you an update on the Vulcan port issue, that would be helpful also.
We're happy to do that, Senator.
Thank you. I want to talk about digital trade because President Trump really has shown great leadership when it comes to digital trade. And that was a part of the negotiations on the USMCA. And it really gave us a very robust and ambitious digital trade chapter. And the provisions, including cross-border data flows and data localization, are critical to facilitating strategic U.S. initiatives across a broad range of industries. And we have an opportunity now to build on this digital chapter. So, and I think that could really pave a way to add other provisions on critical issues such as AI, such as quantum computing that we are dealing with. So how could you use this digital trade chapter that we have in the USMCA to expand that globally as we look at negotiating new trade agreements?
Well, I think it's important to understand that our companies, our digital trade companies, are the most competitive in the world. They're the most effective in the world. And what we don't want is a situation where they are retaliated against or they're discriminated against such that their Chinese competitors actually take up market share. I mean, that would be a disastrous situation. And so as countries come to us and want to talk about how to have more reciprocal trade or better trade actions, I would expect that we want to make sure that they're not discriminating against our technology companies. And we want to have, we want to make sure we have a level playing field so we can have the appropriate market access that we want, and whether we do that in formal trade agreements or just in commitments from these other countries.
Well, and as you know, digital trade is important to Tennessee. So we're looking forward to that. Non-tariff barriers are something that get mentioned quite a bit as we are talking to companies. I know Vietnam has several non-tariff barriers, and we've seen this in the USTR's National Trade Estimate report. And we had a record high deficit with Vietnam in 2024. And in part, that's because Chinese companies are using Vietnam to transship. So will you work to ensure that any possible deal with Vietnam, because I know they've been first to the table to try to negotiate for a zero tariff, but we want to make certain that whatever is done includes provisions that will not allow China to reap the benefits of working with and shipping through Vietnam.
I agree with you 100%, Senator, whether it's Vietnam or others. If they think they're going to have some kind of different rate, it can't be one that gives preference to a third country like China, where they can just take advantage of it or use it to circumvent what we're trying to do. I agree with you 100% on this point.
Well, thank you for that. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator Sanders.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Greer, thanks for being here, and I enjoyed our conversation in the office last month. Let me begin by saying, as I suspect you know, that I am not a great fan of unfettered free trade. I helped lead the effort when I was in the House against NAFTA and against permanent normal trade relations with China. I will never forget a visit that I made to the Macadillo area in Mexico, where I saw brand new factories and literally Mexican workers living in cardboard boxes. And the result, of course, was the loss of hundreds of thousands of jobs, good-paying jobs in this country, transferring them to Mexico where people work for horrendous wages. That is the type of trade policy which I detest. But I want to move to an area to talk about the legal basis of what President Trump has done. President Trump said, Mr. Greer, that he had no choice in terms of Canada, and I live 50 miles away from the Canadian border. He had no choice but to bypass Congress and to impose an emergency 25% tariff on Canada to stop, quote, the massive, end quote, amount of fentanyl and, quote, the millions and millions of undocumented immigrants coming from the northern border. Unfortunately, that's a lie. The truth is that the U.S. Customs and Border Protection reported just 43 pounds of fentanyl was seized at the Canadian border last year, representing just 0.2% of the total. Now, we could agree that 1 pound of fentanyl is too much. But if 0.2% constitutes an emergency, my guess is illegal drugs are coming in from every country in the world. And that gives the President of the United States incredible power to determine tariffs. Further, he said he talked about millions and millions of undocumented immigrants coming from Canada. In fact, last year there were 24,000 people, not millions and millions. First question, really, we can argue about tariffs, but why does the president have to lie all of the time in order to make his point?
So, Senator, I would just refute that when the president is talking about the nature of the emergency we have. I mean,
could you talk a little bit closer into the mic, please?
Certainly. Senator, I would just say, I think you need to look at what the president issued in terms of the order for the legal basis for what we're doing, right? I mean, the president very rightly hit on this issue of fentanyl migration coming from northern southern borders, and it's a real emergency.
Drugs are a real emergency. 0.2%. You can then argue illegal drugs come from every country in the world. If you declare that as an emergency, you're giving the President of the United States unbelievable power. Let me go on that point. Let me mention to you what you probably know. 7 Republicans have joined a number of Democrats on legislation reasserting Congress's ability to play an active role in trade and tariffs. That, on the Republican side, was led by Senator Grassley. And he said, and I quote, "For too long, Congress has delegated its clear authority to regulate interstate and foreign commerce to the executive branch, et cetera, et cetera." He wants to reassert Congress's constitutional role and ensure Congress has a voice in trade policy, end of quote. In the last 2 weeks, all we have seen is reports in the newspaper. Congress has not had 1 ounce of authority in determining tariff policy. Do you think Congress should be completely left out of the process? Or does the president have emergency power to do anything he wants with regard to tariffs?
Senator, my staff has had over 200 meetings with congressional offices in the past 2 months to consult. The president's been very transparent about what he wants to do on tariffs. Congress delegated a law to him to take this action.
Mr. Greer, you can have all the meetings you want. You and I had a nice meeting. But at the end of the day, the president did exactly what he wanted to do without any discussion, formal discussion with members of Congress. He could make recommendations to Congress, that's for sure. Do you really think that he has the power under an emergency degree to reorder the trade world, global trade policy, without any input from the United States Congress?
Sir, Congress gave him this law where if he determines a national emergency, he can take appropriate action to regulate imports. That's what he's done.
And you think it's a national emergency that 0.2% of fentanyl coming from Canada constitutes a national emergency?
Sir,
do you?
The president has determined that Canada...
I'm asking you.
You're asking me about drug policy. So I agree with the president. If you have China and Canada and Mexico putting drugs into this country at different levels, then that's an emergency. We have to deal with it. Look,
we're not going to argue about the danger of drugs. 43 pounds of fentanyl. On that basis, the president can declare an emergency with any country on earth and take unlimited power. That's called authoritarianism. Okay? That's not what a democracy does. Do you have any concerns about all of that power going into the hands of the president?
Sir, Congress delegated this power to the president. He has to renew the emergency every year. He has to give reports to Congress. The Congress told him what he has to do to use this authority, and he's doing those things.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. We have, you've been going now 2 hours and almost 40 minutes, but we have one more question. Senator Wyden has one more question, and then we'll
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. So, Mr. Greer, we've been at this a long time, and you've offered a lot of word salad about international trade, reciprocity, and metrics, and the list goes on and on. But inside this verbiage, you've ducked a very big question, and that is, how can you negotiate with scores of countries before Americans see their 401ks go up in smoke? And so what I'd like to do is just ask you one simple question to wrap this up, because at home in Oregon, people want to know what we're doing to help the people who are hurting today. Not months and months or elections and all kinds of dates far in the future. So here's my question to wrap up. When will those hurting now see real relief?
Senator, the country decisively voted for this president and his trade policy. He knows how to use tariffs appropriately to negotiate deals where necessary and to drive investment and manufacturing back to the U.S. And that's what we're doing. He was successful in his first term in using it. Real wages went up, and that's what we're doing now. And we're working around the clock to make sure we can do that.
Mr. Greer, I gave you a chance to respond to the question, and what you said wasn't accurate. Nobody disputes that the president won the election up here on the dais. But nobody was told in the election campaign that we would have all of these people hurting now because of a flawed trade policy. Once in a while, it would maybe take a little time, but there wasn't any mention of people from one end of the country to another feeling they've been wiped out financially. Nobody heard about that. That was never discussed. Hope you'll have an answer for me, because that's what Americans want to know who are hurting now. They've listened to all of this trade lingo tossed around, and then they scratch their head and say, who's going to stand up for me now? Well, I'll tell you, we're going to fight for those people. That's why I'm proposing a bipartisan resolution that would overturn what's going on with 180 countries. We'll keep the record open for a few days, but what I'd like to know is what the timetable is for helping people who are hurting right now, because I haven't heard anything on that point. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator Wyden. And we are now at the conclusion of the questions. Ambassador Greer, thank you for the time you've given us. As I indicated, you've gone almost 2 hours and 45 minutes. And I think you have been very clear about what the president's intentions are and how you expect this to roll out. The questions for the record deadline is Tuesday, April 15th for members of the Senate. And with that, this hearing is adjourned.
Thank you.
Toward better opportunities for Americans. With that, I turn to Senator Wyden for his remarks.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman and colleagues, today's hearing on the President's trade agenda begins with American retirement funds, investors, and our economy in purgatory thanks to Donald Trump's plan to hike tariffs to levels not seen since before the invention of the automobile.
Hello, everybody. Are there any questions?
How was the golf tournament?
Very good, because I won. It's good to win. You heard I won.
What was your
Did you hear I
score,
won?
sir?
Just to back it up. There, I won.
What's your handicap
I like to
these
win
days?
very low. I have a very low handicap. Okay, let's go.
Sir, Chinese foreign
Back up.
Sure. The Chinese Foreign Ministry said that the market has spoken when asked about the tariffs. What do you make of that?
The market is smoking when they look at the fact that we have $1 billion trade deficit. When you look at the trade deficit that we have with certain countries, way over $1 billion per country. But with China, it's $1 trillion, and we have to solve our trade deficit with China. We have $1 trillion trade deficit with China. Hundreds of billions of dollars a year we lose with China, and unless we solve that problem, I'm not going to make a deal. Now, I'm willing to deal with China, but they have to solve their surplus. We have a tremendous deficit problem with China. They have a surplus of at least $1 trillion a year.
sort of deliberate effort on your part to have the market sell off. Can you talk about that? Whether that was
that's not so. But I do want to solve the deficit problem that we have with China, with the European Union, and other nations. And they're going to have to do that. And if they want to talk about that, I'm open to talking. But otherwise, why would I want to talk? And as you know, because of the tariffs, we have $7 trillion already committed to be invested in the United States, building auto plants, building chip companies, and all sorts of companies are coming into our country at levels that we've never seen before. Biden had nothing coming in. This was a dead country with Biden. He didn't know what he was doing, and that's now been proven at least.
and this weekend? You talked to a lot of leaders this weekend. Can you tell us, sir, were there any deals made?
I spoke to a lot of leaders, European, Asian, from all over the world. They're dying to make a deal. But I said, we're not going to have deficits with your country. We're not going to do that, because to me a deficit is a loss. We're going to have surpluses, or we're at worst going to be breaking even. But China would be the worst in the group, because the deficit is so big and it's not sustainable. And you know, I was elected on this. This was one of the biggest reasons I got elected, was exactly because of this. And we're going to put tariffs, we've already put them on. It's not a question of we will. We're going to put them on. And those tariffs next year will make us $1 trillion. In addition to the $1 trillion, thousands of companies are going to relocate back into the United States. In North Carolina, already furniture people are starting to move back in Detroit and Michigan, which I won because of what I said, what I'm telling you. Car companies are starting to open up. In Indiana, a big one is under construction, as an example, Honda. But they're moving in like nobody's ever seen this before. So it's unsustainable for us to allow China to have surpluses of $1 trillion. We will be taking in over $1 trillion over the next short period of time with the tariffs that I've already instituted. They're already in place. Now, what's going to happen with the market, I can't tell you, but I can tell you our country has gotten a lot stronger. And eventually, it'll be a country like no other. It'll be the most dominant country economically in the world.
Mr. President,
which is what it should be.
is there a Trump put though? Is there pain in the market at some point you're unwilling to tolerate this idea of a Trump put? Is there a threshold?
I think your question is so stupid. I think it's I don't want anything to go down, but sometimes you have to take medicine to fix something, and we have such a horrible. We have been treated so badly by other countries because we had stupid leadership that allowed this to happen. They took our businesses, they took our money, they took our jobs, they moved it to Mexico, they moved it to Canada, they moved a lot of it to China, and it's not sustainable. We're not going to do it. Now we have hundreds of billions of dollars is pouring into our country on a monthly basis. It's pouring. It's already started because I put tariffs on. And eventually it's going to straighten out, and our country will be solid and strong again.
Elon Musk has said he hopes for zero tariffs between the U.S. and Europe. Is that a place you'd like to also get to?
Well, the problem is that Europe has made a fortune with us. You know, Europe also has had a tremendous surplus with the United States. Europe has treated us, it's a little smaller, but they've treated us very, very badly. China has, but Europe has also. Europe has been very, very bad to us. Europe has taken our leaders for a ride. They don't take our cars. They don't take our food products. They don't take anything. And we take their cars, Mercedes, Volkswagen, BMW. You know, we take their millions of cars. They take no cars. They don't take our farm product. They don't take anything. Europe's treated us very badly. We put a big tariff on Europe. They are coming to the table. They want to talk. But there's no talk unless they pay us a lot of money on a yearly basis. Number one for present, but also for past. Because they've taken a lot of our wealth away, and we're not going to allow it to happen.
Sir, have you talked to any tech leaders over the weekend about the tariffs?
Yeah, I talked to the biggest in the world. I talked to the biggest of them all. Many of them, but I've talked to I would say 4 or 5 that are considered the biggest. They don't, and you know what they said? We don't blame you.
Who did you talk to?
I don't want to say. I'll put it out. I may give it to you.
NVIDIA CEO?
I have to find out if they mind. You know, I don't know if that was a confidential call or not, but we had 5 or 6. I've spoken to many countries. They all want to do, just so you understand the power of what I'm doing. Every country is calling and being very solicitous of us. Very, very nice. They're being very nice. And we have to be able to justify. This is not sustainable. The United States can't lose $1.9 trillion on trade. We can't do that and also spend a lot of money on NATO in order to protect European nations. We cover them with military, then we lose money on trade. The whole thing is crazy. And I got elected on that basis. We explained it. You know, the American people understand it a lot better than the media. But the media understands it. And much of the media writes correctly about it, I must say.
Sir,
okay.
Sir, when are the next set of talks with Russia, and who will participate, and where are we in terms of making progress in terms of peace?
We're talking to Russia. We'd like them to stop. I don't like the bombing. The bombing goes on, and every week thousands of young people are being killed. And it's a horrible thing that should have never started, would have never started if I were president, 100%.
On the tariffs, is it a negotiation now? Bloomberg, sir. Is it a negotiation or rules of the road?
Go ahead, another question, please.
Sir, about TikTok.
She has too many questions.
Sir, about TikTok, there was a report that there was about to be a deal, but China changed its mind because of the
I'd
tariffs.
say it was largely true. The report is that we had a deal pretty much for TikTok. Not a deal, but pretty close. And then China changed the deal because of tariffs. If I gave a little cut in tariffs, they'd approve that deal in 15 minutes. Which shows you the power of tariffs, right?
Mr. President, former New Hampshire Governor Chris Sununu is saying that he'll win the open Senate seat in New Hampshire and that he has no doubt you'll support him if he runs. Is that true?
True. I told him. He came to my office, came to the Oval Office, and met with Chris Sununu, and I support him fully. I hope he runs. He's been very nice to me over the last year or so. But no, I hope he runs. I think he'll win that seat.
Sir, when we get into late summer, early fall, and people are doing their back-to-school shopping, do you think they'll have inflation to worry about at that point?
I think there's not going to be. I don't think inflation's going to be a big deal because if you look at me, I took in hundreds of billions of dollars. This is not new to me. I took in during my 4 years hundreds of billions of dollars from China. And we also took in a lot of money from other countries, but in particular China, because it was just getting started. And we had no inflation. Who had inflation was Biden. Biden had the worst inflation in the history of our country. I had no inflation. We had a perfect country. We had no wars. I ended them all. I defeated ISIS. Everything was good. And then when this numbskull got in, as they really call themselves now, numbskulls, but when he got in, bad things happened to our country, including our open border. And now we're doing very well with, we have the best numbers on the border that we've ever had.
Speaking of the border, have you talked to Attorney General Pam Bondi recently about the cases going on with the deportations?
Yeah, sure. It's really sad when you think that Biden allowed millions of people to come in, and if they find one, now I will tell you, the one, somebody said he's a member of MS-13, not Tren de Aragua. He's a member of MS-13, and therefore he should immediately be brought back. Well, MS-13 is just as bad as Tren de Aragua. So they say, oh, we made a mistake because he's not with them, he's with MS-13. Bring him back, bring him back. MS-13 is a very bad group.
Sir, how concerned...
Maybe as bad, actually.
How concerned are you about the measles outbreak? There was another fatality today, and what else would you like to see in terms of the response?
Well, I think they're doing reports on it. It's so far a fairly small number of people relative to what we're talking about. Something that people have known about for many, many years. I mean, measles has been, this is not something new. And we'll see what happens. But certainly, if it progressives will have to take action very strongly.
El Salvador's president said on X that he'd been invited to the White House on April 14th for a working visit to discuss Tren de Aragua and MS-13 and other ways we can support each other, the U.S. and El Salvador. I was curious if you could expand more on what some of these other ideas you have for El Salvador.
I think, you're in the way of that camera, by the way. You should at least say that the camera operator should probably say that she's shooting the back of your head, I don't know why she doesn't say it. I have to say it instead. I have great respect for him. I know him. I've known him for a long time. He's a young leader, and he's very tough on crime. Very, very tough on crime. And in their system, their prison system, they spend a tiny fraction of the money that this country spends. So, but he is coming in, I don't know when, but he is coming in sometime over the next couple of weeks.
What are you and Prime Minister Netanyahu going to speak about tomorrow?
We're going to talk about trade, and we're going to talk about the obvious subject. You know what the obvious subject is.
Do you have any news for us on the obvious subject?
I'm trying to do trade just to keep it down. No, look, there's a lot of things going on with the Middle East right now that have to be silenced. We had no problem with the Middle East. Everything was done. We had no problem with Iran. We had no problem with anybody. And then you had October 7th. And that was all because Iran, as you know, was not giving money to anybody because they had no money. Now they have a lot of money. So we'll see what happens.
To go back to El Salvador, the president there said he would be willing to take American citizens in the federal prison population. Is that one of the ideas you're going to be discussing?
Well, I love that. If we could take some of our 20-time wise guys that push people into subways and that hit people over the back of the head and that purposely run people over in cars, if he would take them, I'd be honored to give them. I don't know what the law says on that, but I can't imagine the law would say anything different. If they can house these horrible criminals for a lot less money than it costs us, I'm all for it. But I'd only do according to the law. But I have suggested that, why should it stop just at people that cross the border illegally? We have some horrible criminals, American grown and born, and if we have somebody that bops an old woman over the head, if we have somebody that is in jail 20 times and goes back and shoots people all over the place and then has a bad judge or a bad prosecutor that do nothing about him, all they worry about is politics, they don't worry about that. I think if we could get El Salvador or somebody to take them, I'd be very happy with it, but I have to see what the law says. Okay, what else?
Can you say, did you agree to lowering tariffs for any of the countries that you spoke to today? So
what you understand, Jennifer, you have to understand this. We have massive surplus countries that we're dealing with. We have massive deficits. We've got to straighten that out because you can't continue to be that way. It's been that way for years now, and it can't go on any longer. And we're the piggy bank. We have all the advantages. Forget markets for a second. We have all the advantages. We're going to straighten out. We're going to become a wealthy nation again. Wealthy like never before. And we're not going to let other nations that have been ripping us off, whether it's China or the European Union, with all of the European nations that have just made, it's been like a feast. Look, the European Union was formed for one reason. You know what that was? To rip off the United States. So put that in your bonnet. I hope you had a good flight. Have a good time.
Thank you for your time, Mr. President.
Thank you, sir. See you tomorrow.
Thank you very much. It's an honor to be with you today. We just celebrated Women's Day at the White House. It was fantastic, attended by a lot of
Until the briefing.
You guys ready? Great. Good afternoon, everybody. How are we? Good to see you all. I have a few announcements off the top today. On April 14th, President Trump will welcome President Bukele of El Salvador for an official working visit here at the White House. They will discuss El Salvador's partnership on using their Supermax prison for Tren de Aragua and MS-13 gang members, and how El Salvador's cooperation with the United States has become a model for others to work with this administration. On April 17th, President Trump will welcome Prime Minister Giorgia Meloni of Italy for an official working visit at the White House as well. The president's thoughts also remain with the families and communities experiencing devastating loss from the severe storms and flooding affected several states across the central U.S. President Trump approved emergency declarations for Arkansas, Kentucky, and Tennessee, allowing FEMA to provide federal assistance like equipment and resources to support state and local emergency response officials who are leading this response on the ground. Last night, the Supreme Court delivered a massive legal victory to the Trump administration and allowed us to continue removing foreign terrorist invaders under the Alien Enemies Act. This was a smackdown to a rogue left-wing, low-level district court judge who have relentlessly tried to stop President Trump from using his core constitutional powers as head of the executive branch and as commander-in-chief. The highest court in the land made it clear that the President of the United States has the power to protect our homeland and forcibly remove foreign terrorists who pose a grave threat to families and communities. Thank you to the Supreme Court for upholding the rule of law and protecting the Constitution. Our message to the monster Tren de Aragua and MS-13 terrorists still hiding illegally inside our country is clear. Deport yourself now, or you will be locked up and sent back to your home country. On another matter, the historic Liberation Day announcement last week by President Trump made it very clear that the era of American economic surrender is over. President Trump is no longer going to allow American workers and companies to be ripped off at the hands of foolish trade practices that shipped away millions of high-paying jobs and hollowed out communities across the country. It's America first, all the way. And despite fear-mongering by the media, the world is clearly responding to President Trump's approach. Just yesterday, President Trump held a bilateral meeting with Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu here at the White House. The Prime Minister pledged to immediately eliminate America's trade deficit with Israel and remove their trade barriers. Israel's proactive approach should serve as a model for the rest of the world. Also yesterday, the President spoke with Japan's Prime Minister, who wants to negotiate as well. The President also spoke to the acting President of South Korea this morning. He has tasked Secretary Bessent and U.S. Trade Representative Jamieson Greer to lead these talks. In total, since the Liberation Day announcement, nearly 70 countries have already reached out to the President to begin a negotiation. Countries are falling over themselves to reform their unfair trade practices and free open their markets to our country. Why? Because these countries greatly respect President Trump in the sheer power of the American market. These countries realize they've gotten filthy rich over the past few decades by imposing substantial tariffs on American-made products and ridiculous non-monetary barriers to block out American industry. The jig is up. Past American presidents sat by and let this happen, but President Trump stood up for our country, and he is saying no more. The President's message has been simple and consistent from the beginning. To countries around the world, bring us your best offers, and he will listen. Deals will only be made if they benefit American workers and address our nation's crippling trade deficits. America does not need other countries as much as other countries need us, and President Trump knows this. He's going to use the leverage of our markets and our country to the advantage of the people he was sworn in to represent. On the other hand, countries like China, who have chosen to retaliate and try to double down on their mistreatment of American workers, are making a mistake. President Trump has a spine of steel, and he will not break, and America will not break under his leadership. He is guided by a firm belief that America must be able to produce essential goods for our own people and export them to the rest of the world. A strong America cannot be solely dependent on foreign countries for our food, medicines, and critical minerals. And America must always maintain a robust defense supply chain. Reprioritizing and strengthening our manufacturing industry are essential national and economic security issues of the utmost importance to President Trump. By focusing on supercharging the onshoring of American manufacturing, the President is already delivering on his promise to usher in an economic golden age for our country. Just look at Friday's jobs report, which smashed expectations for the second straight month. The American economy added 228,000 jobs, nearly 100,000 more jobs than economists predicted, and the fourth highest month for private payroll growth in the past 2 years. There was also a sharp increase in transportation, construction, and warehousing employment. And in just 11 weeks, President Trump has secured more than $1.5 trillion in private sector investment. This is $500 billion more than Joe Biden secured in his entire term. This record-breaking private sector investment will create roughly 350,000 American jobs and counting. If you add up all of the investment pledges from foreign governments, President Trump has secured an incredible $5 trillion in total investments already. In the months ahead, President Trump's pro-growth economic agenda will be fully realized. The largest deregulatory effort in American history is underway. Unnecessary, burdensome, costly red tape is being eliminated by this entire federal government every day, driving down costs and massively boosting small businesses. So far, President Trump's deregulation effort has already saved Americans more than $180 billion, equivalent to $2,100 per family of four. The president's drill baby drill energy agenda, which he will discuss later this evening in the East Room, is capitalizing on the abundance of natural resources under our feet to generate more affordable electricity, cheap gas, and quality new jobs. All of this will combine to end the Biden-imposed cost of living crisis that's absolutely crushed American families. Under President Trump, the American energy industry will lead the globe over the next century, delivering lower prices and significantly strengthening our country's economic position. At the president's direction, Republicans in Congress are working quickly to pass one big, beautiful bill, which will also include the largest tax cut in American history. As President Trump has said, the House must pass this budget resolution quickly. Here in our new media seat today, we have Jasmine Wright, the White House reporter for Notice. Notice is a nonprofit and nonpartisan news site which launched in early 2024. They've gained millions of readers across the country since. Newsroom's goal is both to inform readers and train the next generation of politics and policy journalists. They also partner with state newsrooms to give local communities more knowledge of what their representatives are doing in Washington, D.C. With that, please kick us off, Jasmine.
Thanks so much, Caroline. A couple questions for you. The first one being, can you explain the White House's evolution from this is not a negotiation on tariffs to countries should pitch us and start negotiations on tariffs?
As the president said yesterday, Jasmine, both things can be true at the same time, and it is a non-negotiable position. To have tailor-made trade deals with each and every country that calls up this administration to strike a deal and listen. And each and every one of these trade deals should be tailored and unique based on that country's markets, based on that country's exports, the imports here in the United States of America. What makes the most sense for the American worker and for our industry? The president is focused on putting America first.
So was the evolution not factored in or determined by kind of the tumult in the stock market? Was that not a part of the consideration to start making these negotiations and deals?
Again, I would reject that there was an evolution. On day one, we had said that the president will always pick up the phone for other nations and other companies that call this administration. The president always has a listening ear, and it's a non-negotiable fact that America has faced a national security and economic crisis for many decades, and President Trump is just the first to address this.
And then my last question, how will negotiations change how much revenue the White House is planning to make from the tariffs?
Well, that has yet to be seen, but as the president said, the reciprocal tariffs, which will continue to go in effect as these deals are negotiated and ongoing, will generate trillions of dollars in revenue to the United States. And this is twofold. The president wants to onshore jobs here to the United States of America. He wants to boost our manufacturing industry. He also wants to tackle these crippling deficits with almost every single country around the world. Jackie.
Thanks, Caroline. The Treasury Secretary, Scott Bessent, warned that some of these negotiations might take up to months, that we could be doing this through April, May, and into June. And then you had Kevin Hassett say it's going to take a lot for the president to put his signature on the line because he wants to make sure there's a good deal for America. Is the president operating on any sort of a timeline or deadline where he wants this completed by?
Well, we always move at Trump speed here at the White House, which is incredibly fast. I know you all know that from covering this White House day to day. The president likes to get things done, but he's very much focused on ensuring that these deals are good for the American worker. They are good for American manufacturing, and again, that they tackle these crippling deficits with these countries. All options are on the table for each country, but again, these are going to be tailor-made deals. They are not going to be off-the-rack deals, as the president has called it, and he has directed his entire trade team to be part of this effort. So that includes Secretary Bessent and our National Economic Director, Kevin Hassett. It also includes Secretary Lutnick, Peter Navarro, the entire trade team, Jamison Greer, who was on the Hill today. Everybody who was involved in this incredible, fair, reciprocal trade agenda will continue to be involved in negotiating these deals.
And then yesterday, Goldman Sachs put out a research note. It put the odds of a recession at 45% within the next 12 months, up from 35%. But Peter Navarro guaranteed last night no recession. Does the president agree with him on that? I know that the president in the past has been leery of making definitive statements on that?
I can speak for the president, and I can speak for the optimism that he sees in our economy every day. Again, when you talk about the massive deregulatory efforts that are happening across the board, when you talk about how oil prices are down, gas prices are down, egg prices are down, we're cutting costs for the American worker, for the American consumer. We also see trillions of dollars of investments pouring into this country every day, and we're working hard now on the tariff side of the president's economic agenda. But don't forget, the next side of this is tax cuts, and we're counting on Capitol Hill to get those done, the largest tax cuts in history.
Does that mean that without those tax cuts coming through, that the likelihood of a recession is greater?
No, that's not what I said. I'm just saying be mindful of the whole of government economic approach that this administration is taking every day. Sure. Go ahead.
Thank you, Caroline. You just said that one of the reasons these tariffs are going into effect is that some countries have been ripping off the United States, but some of the tariffs target countries like Madagascar, Bangladesh, with very high levels of poverty. So can you explain how the president wants to correct the deficit with those countries? Is there a plan, for example, to onshore the textile industry that these countries are known because, and, you know, just like, can you be specific about those like low income?
Sure. Well, first of all, the reciprocal tariff rates that were implemented by country were focused on the monetary tariff that those countries have imposed on the United States, but also the non-monetary tariff barriers and the regulations, if you will, that have been put into effect over the years, making it harder for America to export to these countries. These were very carefully crafted numbers. There was also a 10% baseline tariff across the board, as well, as you know. Moving forward, the president will talk to any country that picks up the phone to call, and I can tell you the phones have been ringing off the hook, wanting to talk to this administration, this president, and his trade team to try to strike a deal. And it's because the world knows that they need the United States of America. They need our markets. They need our consumer. The president has a lot of leverage on his side because he has the best economy and the best country in the world that he leads, and he knows that. And it's about dang time we finally have a president who uses that economic leverage to benefit American workers. And that's what the president is trying to do. Maggie.
Caroline, thanks. Does the president endorse something that Howard Lutnick said on television this weekend, which was that the army of millions and millions of human beings screwing in little screws to make iPhones, that kind of thing is going to be moving to the U.S.? Is that how the president envisions manufacturing shifting? And if so, how long would that take, roughly?
The president wants to increase manufacturing jobs here in the United States of America, but he's also looking at advanced technologies. He's also looking at AI and emerging fields that are growing around the world that the United States needs to be a leader in as well. So there's an array of diverse jobs, more traditional manufacturing jobs, as you discussed, but also jobs in advanced technologies. The president is looking at all of those. He wants them to come back home.
But iPhones specifically, is that something that he thinks is the kind of technology that can move to the U.S.?
Absolutely. He believes we have the labor, we have the workforce, we have the resources to do it. And as you know, Apple has invested $500 billion here in the United States. So if Apple didn't think the United States could do it, they probably wouldn't have put up that big chunk of change. Elena.
Hi, Caroline. It's clear the president has gotten the world's attention with these tariffs. Is he considering at all potentially holding off on imposing some of them before the deadline, or maybe later, reversing them because he's having these negotiations and having these good talks with other leaders?
The president was asked and answered this yesterday. He said he's not considering an extension or a delay. I spoke to him before this briefing. That was not his mindset. He expects that these tariffs are going to go into effect. And you said something very important, Elena, in your question. You said the president has captivated the attention of the world. Absolutely, he has. And it's about time we have a president in the Oval Office who is putting the world on notice and is putting the American people first, and again, is using the leverage of the United States to negotiate good trade deals.
Just a quick follow-up. Sure. There's been some public sparring between Elon Musk and the president's trade advisor, Peter Navarro, on some of these tariffs. Musk actually referred to Navarro today as being, quote, dumber than a sack of bricks. Are you at all, or is the administration, the president, all concerned that this is maybe impacting the public's understanding of these tariffs? It might be messing with the message on it?
No, look, these are obviously two individuals who have very different views on trade and on tariffs. Boys will be boys, and we will let their public sparring continue. And you guys should all be very grateful that we have the most transparent administration in history. And I think it also speaks to the president's willingness to hear from all sides, that he has people at the highest levels of this government in this White House who have very diverse opinions on very diverse issues, but the president takes all opinions in mind, and then he makes the best decision based on the best interests of the American public. Deanna.
Thanks, Caroline. On Truth Social today, Trump was talking about one-stop shopping talks with foreign leaders, bringing leaders to the U.S., to Washington, and talking to them about tariffs, but also other topics. So is that part of his strategy to bring the leaders to Washington and trying to get deals, outside of tariffs on foreign policy issues as well?
I think the president, again, is going to have a custom, tailor-made approach to each and every country. And if that means discussions of foreign aid, of our military presence in these countries, how those troops are paid for, come to the table, that could be part of the negotiation in these economic negotiations. But it's the president's economic team who will be leading these. These are tariff and trade negotiations. And yes, they will be one-stop shopping for each and every country. They will be, as the president said again, tailor-made, not off the rack to each and every country based on America's needs.
Can you
Caroline,
confirm?
hey, how are you? Thank you so
Good.
much, Carol from Lynn's LTV. So President Trump has designated Tren de Aragua as a foreign terrorist organization and deported its members while also moving to restrict Venezuela's oil exports. Is the administration preparing additional military or economic actions against Venezuela and the Maduro regime? And my second question is about Supreme Court Justice Amy Coney Barrett. Is the administration have a comment on her decision to go with the liberals and go actually with the Tren de Araguas? This is the same justice that actually sided against January 6th hostages last year. So is the administration have a comment? Are they disappointed in Supreme Court Justice Amy Coney Barrett?
To your first question, I don't have any actions to read out in terms of Venezuela. The president has imposed secondary tariffs on the Maduro regime and on Venezuela in the form of oil, which is obviously going to have a crippling effect on the Maduro regime, and that's the intended effect of this administration. As for the justice you mentioned, as for the Supreme Court, we've made our feelings very clear. We believe this was a massive victory. Certainly, we wish this was a 9-0 decision because we firmly believe that the president was well within his constitutional authority, and the Supreme Court made that very clear last night, and they put Judge Boasberg in his place. We called on the Supreme Court to rein in these judges who are acting as judicial activists, not real arbiters of the truth and the law, and that's exactly what we saw the Supreme Court do yesterday. Christian.
Thanks, Caroline. Now that the president's reciprocal tariffs are here, going into effect tomorrow, what's the status of the ERS? When will they actually start collecting revenue? And will that be nested under CBP or somewhere else entirely?
Something Secretary Lutnick has taken up, so I defer you to the Department of Commerce, but it's something that he and the president believe quite strongly in, and it's a promise that they intend to keep to the American
Real quickly, can you explain why the president opted to send Secretary Hegseth to the dignified transfer last week instead of attending himself?
Sure. The Secretary Hegseth was there to represent the administration. The president has expressed his condolences to these families, as have I from this podium. Shelby.
Thank you. The president's trade representative this morning told senators that the president does not intend on carving out exemptions for products and companies when it comes to tariffs. But would the administration consider changing that stance should bankruptcies begin among U.S. companies who are dependent on China trade?
I won't get ahead of the president on any exemptions or his decision on that. I will leave that to him. But again, we're looking at this country by country and based on the needs of the American people and the American workforce.
And one more, can you walk us through how this specific tariff plan was decided on and which advisor came up with it?
The reciprocal tariff plan? It was a plan that was discussed by the president's entire trade team over the course of many, many meetings, and the president ultimately decided on which way to go. A few proposals were given to the president. There was debate and discussion, and the president made his decision. And as you've seen very publicly, the entire trade team is on board with this plan and the negotiations that will ensue because of it. Sure.
Caroline, on Iran, given what's going to be happening on Saturday, what exactly is the current administration doing to stop Iran's funding of terrorist aggression worldwide that the previous administration wasn't doing?
Well, first of all, when it comes to Saturday, I won't get ahead of the president. He has said there will be direct talks with Iran on Saturday. I won't further any details from this podium for obvious reasons, security reasons. It will, provide an update as we always have. However, when it comes to Iran, the president has reimposed crippling sanctions on the Iranian regime, and he's made it very clear to Iran they have a choice to make. You can strike a deal with the president, you can negotiate, or there will be hell to pay. And as the president said yesterday, if they don't choose to move forward with diplomacy and a deal, which is the direction we do see them headed in, there will be grave consequences to pay. To the back row.
Thank
Go
you,
ahead.
Caroline. On the president's threat yesterday on social media to increase tariffs against China by an additional 50% in response to their retaliation, has he signed anything in terms of an executive order, any documentation around that? Will that additional 50% go into effect tomorrow?
They will be going into effect at 12:01 a.m. tonight, so effectively tomorrow, yes.
Work on that today?
Of course, as always. To the gentleman in front of you, because that's who I originally called on. Go ahead.
Over the weekend, President Trump said that he would be willing to have U.S. citizens deported to El Salvador with the cooperation of President Bukele. How would that work legally, and how many people would potentially be available for that operation?
So the president has discussed this idea quite a few times publicly. He's also discussed it privately. You're referring to the president's idea for American citizens to potentially be deported. These would be heinous, violent criminals who have broken our nation's laws repeatedly. And these are violent, repeat offenders in American streets. The president has said, if it's legal, right? If there is a legal pathway to do that, he's not sure. We are not sure if there is. It's an idea that he has simply floated and has discussed very publicly as in the effort of transparency. Reagan.
Thank you, Caroline. There's been more reporting coming out now about President Biden's decline while in the White House. Is the White House considering releasing the audio of Biden's interview with Special Counsel Robert Hur to the public, which the former president had previously blocked?
I don't have an update on that, but I can certainly check. I think the American people would be quite interested to hear that tape, but I'll double check on the release of it. Thank you. Michael.
Thank you, Caroline. On Saturday, during meetings with Iran, President Trump says high-level officials will be meeting directly with Iranian officials. We're hearing some pushback from Iran now saying those talks will be indirect. Can you clarify?
They will be direct talks on Saturday, and I won't get ahead of the president on any further details. Jennifer.
Yeah, two things. On the Israel tariffs, can you give us an update on the discussion on relaxing those tariffs? And then I had another question about the Doge team after that.
That discussion is ongoing. I don't have any definitive details to iron out for you here.
And then the president on Thursday told us that there was an incredible discovery that the Doge team had made. He called it horrible and incredible. Can you reveal that yet? Give us details on what it was about?
There has been a discovery. I hate to leave you hanging on a cliff, but I don't want to get ahead of the president on that. But I can confirm there has been a discovery. It's just not quite yet ready for release. Sure. Go ahead.
Caroline, thank you.
I was calling on the young lady behind you, but I'll come to you after, Ed.
All right.
Not discriminating here.
The president is meeting today with House Republicans. Can you say who is in that meeting and his message to Republicans that are skeptical of the Senate-passed budget framework?
Sure. The president will be meeting with Republican lawmakers today here at the White House to talk to them about the framework that the Senate passed. The president was very quick to put out a statement about his support for the reconciliation package that the Senate passed, and he is counting on House Republicans to pass it. The Republicans received an overwhelming mandate from the American public to govern. We have an extraordinary opportunity. There are key promises that the president made to the American people in this bill: tax cuts, securing the border, deregulation, unleashing the might of American energy. These are good things for the American people. The president wants to see this get done, and that's why he's engaging with lawmakers today.
And just a quick follow-up on tariffs. Kevin Hassett said today that the administration is prioritizing talks with Japan and South Korea, other trading partners. Are there other countries on that list that you guys can name publicly that you're having serious discussions with?
Sure. As you have heard from various administration officials, myself included, there have been nearly 70 countries that have reached out to the administration last time I checked, but again, I hear the phones are ringing off the hook. There are foreign leaders who want to fly to Washington tonight and get on a plane to negotiate with this country, which shows you the leverage that the president is using. It shows you the rest of the world needs the United States of America to do business with. Israel, obviously, yesterday you heard a public statement from Prime Minister Netanyahu. The president has detailed his calls with the leaders of Japan and South Korea. We are going to prioritize our allies and our partners around the world first when it comes to these negotiations, and the trade team will be divvying them up again to make tailor-made trade deals around the world. Ed, go ahead. As promised.
Yes, thank you. You mentioned the 70 countries or so. I'm curious, though, under what conditions at this point would President Trump talk to President Xi? about tariffs?
Look, I just spoke to the president about this, and he believes that China wants to make a deal with the United States. He believes China has to make a deal with the United States. It was a mistake for China to retaliate. The president, when America is punched, he punches back harder. That's why there will be 104% tariffs going into effect on China tonight at midnight. But the president believes that she and China want to make a deal. They just don't know how to get that started. And the president also wanted me to tell all of you that if China reaches out to make a deal, he'll be incredibly gracious, but he's going to do what's best for the American people.
So China has to call first?
The Chinese want to make a deal. They just don't know how to do it. But the president will be implementing these 104% tariffs on China tonight.
Under what conditions might he consider lowering tariffs on China at this point?
It would be imprudent of me to tell you those conditions here from the podium. Sure, Gabe.
Thanks, Caroline. With regards to the Supreme Court ruling on the Alien Enemies Act, you're right, it was a win for the administration, but the justices also said that deportees are entitled to due process. Does the administration agree with that?
That's not quite true, Gabe. They said that they are entitled to a habeas petition, and we are going to continue to comply with the law, and we are wholly confident that every single person that has been deported under the Alien Enemies Act, every person that will continue to be deported under the Alien Enemies Act qualifies for that deportation.
NBC News is reporting that the administration is considering drone strikes on drug cartels in Mexico. We're citing several officials. This morning, Mexico's president was asked about that, and she said that we reject any of those actions. Your response?
I saw that reporting. I don't want to confirm it from this podium. I don't want to comment on it because I'm not sure, but I would defer you to the National Security Council.
So you haven't confirmed the report, but with Mexico's president saying that she rejects any of that, what would your response be? How is the relationship then between Mexico's president and the White House right now over targeting drug cartels?
Well, first of all, the relationship between President Sheinbaum and President Trump is quite good, and I think both world leaders would tell you that. The president has been engaged directly with President Sheinbaum on a number of different topics, particularly when it comes to clamping down on the Mexican drug cartels, on clamping down on illegal immigration, human trafficking, drug trafficking through our southern border. She's taken significant steps towards doing that, but as for that specific report, again, I'm not going to comment.
Caroline, two questions on trade. First, as a part of these negotiations, is it possible for countries to lower their tariffs below that 10% bare minimum that's been set?
Again, I'll leave that to the president to make those determinations, but I can tell you that 10% universal baseline will go into effect as these negotiations are ongoing.
Got it. And then what is your thinking just as far as low labor cost countries? Like if you've got a country like Vietnam that wants to negotiate, but obviously they have some advantages in terms of trade, in terms of the people there are not paid as much as American citizens. What is kind of the thinking? Can they still achieve a good kind of trade outcome with the United States?
Well, again, you're right to point out that different countries have different labor markets. They have different skills, if you will, different resources, and the president is going to take all of that into account. His team will take all of that into account when they're negotiating these deals. I do just want to point out one thing, that the president, everybody in Washington, whether they want to admit it or not, knows that this president is right when it comes to tariffs and when it comes to trade. In fact, Democrats have long said that the United States of America has been ripped off by the countries around the world. They just don't want to admit it now because it's President Trump who is saying that. In June of 1996, Nancy Pelosi spoke on the House floor. She urged her colleagues at the time to fight against the status quo trade policies that had contributed to America's trade deficit with China. In fact, Nancy Pelosi said, "How far does China have to go? How much more repression? How big a trade deficit? How many jobs have to be lost for the American workers? How much dangerous proliferation has to exist before members of this House of Representatives will say, 'I will not endorse the status quo'?" Those are the words of Nancy Pelosi in 1996. Well, President Trump is finally answering her call 27 years later. Nancy Pelosi can thank President Trump today for the 104% retaliatory tariff that will be going into effect on China. In 2007, Chuck Schumer spoke of our nation's crippling trade deficit, saying, "These are the kinds of records the American people don't want us to be breaking. The administration needs to move beyond words, take action now to reverse a trend that threatens our prospects for future economic growth." And Chuck Schumer said that in 2007. Finally, in 2025, President Trump is taking action. Recently defeated Democrat Sherrod Brown said on deficits in 2012 that our deficit then at China had reached an all-time high, and it was on pace to recede last year's record. The trade deficit had cost American workers millions of jobs at the time. These are the words of Democrats years ago. It is about time America finally has a president who is taking action to restore those millions of jobs back to the United States of America, to boost our manufacturing industry. He's doing what's right for the American people. It will take a lot of labor. It will take a lot of effort. That's exactly what the American people elected this president to do. He will be talking about our energy agenda at 3 o'clock today over in the East Room, as you all know. He will be signing a bill to unleash the might of our beautiful, clean coal industry in this country, which is a reliable energy source also for AI. There's a great story in Bloomberg today, actually, about the executive order that will be signed later. So we'll see you all there. I'll let the president speak more. We'll see you later. Thanks, guys.
Thank you.
Tried to force a vote. I was shut down because the truth is they know this will be a disaster, and that's why they're blocking Democrats from demanding a vote. Republicans don't want to lower costs anymore. They want to lower your standard of living, and that's exactly what these tariffs will do. Now let's be clear. Foreign countries don't pay the tariffs. We do. American businesses, American farmers, American families, that's who pays the tariffs. And unfortunately, the damage has been done. Our trading partners are abandoning us. Our allies don't trust us. Our adversaries are laughing at us. And the cherry on top is that Trump can't even explain the goal. He's slapping tariffs on everyone, including uninhabited islands, but not on Russia. No tariffs on Russia. Tariffs on Ukraine, but not on Russia. I'm sure Putin is thrilled. This is a gut punch to middle America. This is a tax on every single family in America. This is a disaster for our future. Congress needs to do its job. It is time for every Republican to put their name on this mess or finally stand up and stop it. I urge a no vote, and I yield back my time.
Gentleman yields back the balance of his time. Gentlewoman from North Carolina.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I have to respond about the fact that we are denying new mothers and prospective mothers the opportunity to vote with this legislation. That is just not true. It's going to need to be refuted over and over again. What we have done is accommodate not only prospective and new mothers, we've accommodated other members who might need that accommodation. So let me be clear about that. That is absolutely true. Mr. Speaker, House Republicans remain laser focused on governing and advancing legislation that addresses pertinent issues across the nation. Our foot is placed firmly upon the gas pedal of solving problems the American people want us to solve. The 4 pieces of legislation that will be considered under this rule are part of our governing efforts and are in alignment with the mandate that Americans gave us last November. Shielding consumer choice, protecting consumer choice, and combating foreign influence within higher education in America are issues that Americans care about. We have heard their concerns, and we're addressing them yet again this week. With that, I urge my colleagues to vote yes on the previous question and yes on the rule. Mr. Speaker, I yield back the balance of my time and move the previous question on the resolution.
All time for debate has expired. The question is on ordering the previous question on the resolution. Those favoring a vote by the ayes and nays will rise. Those in favor say aye. Those opposed, no.
Oh,
In the opinion of the chair, the ayes have it.
Speaker, I ask for the yeas and nays.
Those favoring a vote by the ayes and nays will rise. Sufficient number having arisen, the yeas and nays are ordered. Pursuant to Clause 8 of Rule 20, further proceedings on this question will be postponed. Pursuant to Clause 12A of Rule 1, the chair declares the House in recess, subject to call of the chair.